Hey everybody, today is Monday, October 9th, 2023. Coming up on the show today, from the creator, editor Scott Morris.
Since we were getting to know each other and feeling each other out, we'd cut for a little while, we'd talk about philosophy, we would talk about the types of films that we love. It was part hang out, get to know each other, and part rigorous, intense editing. I absolutely love working with writer-directors. One of the things I love about it is how open they are to working the material. Since it is their world, their imagination, it just allows a very freeing environment. On this project, we had one of the best crews I've ever experienced. Just wonderful, wonderful people. The most important thing is the crew. It's the people you spend your time with. Doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter what you're doing, it's always about the people.
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Well, hey there. What do you know? It's podcast time again. Hopefully that is welcome news to you, because otherwise, I don't know, stop now, I guess. But I hope you don't, because we have someone new to meet, which is always fun. Now, over the past couple of months, we've been spending a lot of time talking about TV shows, and we'll certainly do more of that. But I thought it would be nice to take a trip back to the theater for some big screen entertainment. And this is definitely big screen entertainment. Yet it was shot with a small camera and a small crew. Go figure. You could almost call it a big budget indie movie. That movie is The Creator, co-written and directed by Gareth Edwards, as in Star Wars Rogue One, Gareth Edwards. So what are you going to see on that big screen if you go see The Creator? Well, this is a timely subject. You will see a future war, circa 2065, between the human race and the AI-based robots, humanoids, beings that they/we created. It seems the humans blame Team AI for nuking Los Angeles, and Team AI just wants to be left alone to live out their digital lives. Lots of big themes in this one. Themes that have certainly been explored before, but feel somewhat more vital at the present moment. Tackling this challenge was the editing team of Hank Corwin, Joe Walker, and Scott Morris. From that team, we have Scott Morris rising to the Rough Cut Challenge today, which is exciting because, as I have said, we have not spoken to him before. As far as Joe Walker and Hank Corwin go, we last spoke with Mr. Walker, along with Hans Zimmer, about Dune, for which both gentlemen won an Oscar. And you can feel free to go back and check out that podcast, or you can even see it as a rare video version of the podcast on the Rough Cut YouTube channel. Regarding Hank Corwin, he and Scott are somewhat frequent collaborators, most notably on Adam McKay's feature Don't Look Up, so they've got a little history. Anyway, it'll be a lot of fun getting to know Scott for the first time today and hearing what it was like realizing Gareth Edwards' vision for The Creator. But before we check in with Scott, let's take a minute to learn a little about the people who helped and continue to help, thank you very much, to bring you these interviews, our dear friends at Extreme Music. They are the ones who provide film and TV makers like you with the very best in production audio. Music created by the biggest musicians and composers in the business. Trent Reznor, Mark Mothersbaugh, Michael Giacchino, Hans Zimmer, we just talked about him, Quincy Jones, and so many more. The way you get that music is easy. All you got to do is go to extrememusic.com and search their enormous catalog of tunes with metadata like genre, tempo, instruments, lyrics. And of course, you can just upload a track to Extreme Music and they will use their amazing artful intelligence to find you ones like it. You can get your tracks in different links, you can get your tracks with different instruments, you can do it all right there on their website. Or if you need a little help with the licensing, you can talk to one of their friendly reps at an office near you. So the next time you have a big TV show or movie to make, well, you go make it with those musical geniuses at Extreme Music. Okay then, time to meet today's special guest. Won't you please welcome, from Gareth Edwards, The Creator, editor Scott Morris. Well, Scott, a lot of people, I think, are very excited about The Creator because it's the first thing, I think, that Gareth Edwards has directed since Rogue One. That was 9 years ago, so clearly that would make it difficult for you to have worked with him recently or even at all prior to this. So that begs the question, how was it that you ended up a part of the editing team for The Creator?
Well, I like to think I got very lucky. It's kind of a dream. I've been a fan of Gareth since Monsters, his first project. So basically, I've been working with Hank Corwin for a while. He's been mentoring me through the years. And he got contacted to do it. I guess if I roll it back a little bit more, Joe Walker had originally signed on to do it with Gareth, I think way back in 2019 when Gareth was prepping to shoot. And then, of course, the pandemic of 2020 happens and the project got pushed a little while, about a year. You know, Joe had done Dune, the first Dune, and he had signed on to, of course, the second Dune. So when everything pushed, his schedule became more complicated. So Joe was able to start the project, but he knew he had to hand it off at some point after production or to the end of production. So Joe and Hank are friendly, and Joe contacted Hank, and Hank was, very impressed with the project and with Gareth. And so he called me, and I was very excited, being a big fan of science fiction and of Gareth. So we kind of got excited to do it. And then Joe and his amazing team, Christos Voutsinas and Job Tierberg, Dylan Merriman, they had just done an incredible job of preparing for the handoff. And then Dylan and Job stayed on for a few months after Joe had gone on with Chris to Dune, and they helped us tremendously.
Well, that's pretty interesting hearing about the handoff from Joe Walker and his team to you and Hank. What goes on in a situation like that? What do they do to prepare for a handoff from one crew to another?
Well, this is something where Joe had known, I think when they had started the project, that they were preparing for this because they knew it was going to happen. It wasn't a surprise. So from the get-go, they were preparing for us. So they had set up sequences. They would cut scenes, but they'd also have, alternate sequences prepared for us, with different options. They were very meticulous about how they organized the footage. Gareth has a unique shooting style, which I'm a huge fan of. I love the way he works. This movie was shot on the FX3, and he shoots with this docu style almost, where, he ops most of the shots, and he'll just run the camera for 20, 30-minute takes. They're not just, resets. He's also, they're new setups. So, he'll shoot, kind of a master shot, and then he'll move to a different part of the room, find his lighting, and then just keep rolling, a new take. So the actors were performing it, multiple times, the scene, but he was getting different setups and different angles. So that's why we would have these long takes. So the organization became more like, I suppose, a documentary where, a lot of sub-clipping and preparation of sequences. They left a lot of breadcrumbs for us. They were really trying to set it up, knowing that this would happen.
I don't know that you necessarily went through an interview process with him, but I would like to know what you talked about with Gareth about working on this film.
Yeah, it was kind of, I remember first meeting Gareth. It was so fun to just dive right in. We didn't know each other, and we just started cutting. I think it was a way for both of us to get to know each other. So I think the first scene we started on was the tank battle sequence in the film. And yeah, we just started working together. And since we were getting to know each other and feeling each other out, we'd cut for a little while. We'd talk about philosophy. We would talk about the types of films that we love. It was part hang out, get to know each other, and part rigorous, intense editing to meet a deadline. But it worked really naturally for both of us.
So you talked about philosophy. There are definitely some big themes in this movie, which have been brought up in other movies, but not really at a time when the adoption of AI and its effect on society is top of mind for a lot of people. Obviously, you're excited to do this, but what thoughts did you have when you first looked at that script? Anything jump out to you or prompt any questions from you for Gareth or Hank or Joe?
When I first read the script, I was just immediately impressed with the world building, the sense of scale. It was such a massive project. I was thinking about David Lean, Bridge on the River Kwai, Lawrence of Arabia. There's these massive projects of the original Star Wars as far as the world building and the scale. But I was also so impressed with the emotional depth and how grounded it was in character. It had these huge questions that it was asking, which, I absolutely love science fiction. So does Gareth, the Twilight Zone, the original Planet of the Apes, all these classics that ask these massive questions, including the original Blade Runner. And the script had all of that. It was asking these huge, huge questions that I think science fiction can do in such a exciting way. Science fiction can pull us out of our world, and then we can focus on these great truths and these massive ideas. The film tackles, prejudice and grief, what it means to be human. I mean, that was kind of the thing that excited me most. And originally, I think AI, is kind of designed as a metaphor for other, and how we process those relationships and that relationship with fear and nature. So I was very excited about that, and the spirituality component in the reincarnation and just what we think about in the way, cyberpunk stories, and this is a little cyberpunky, the idea of talking about the nature of the human body or the robot body. And when we talk about these questions about life and death, it was very impressive, all of the stuff that Gareth and Chris Weitz were exploring in the script.
Well, yeah. I mean, as I said, big themes. Well, you name checked a few movies in there, certainly Blade Runner. And it's hard not to think of films like that. I mean, I thought of Blade Runner, of course, and it's been mentioned in other articles. District 9. As I said, this concept, these themes have been explored before. You mentioned a few movies. Did Gareth actually give you any reference points and allude to either those ones that I mentioned or any other films?
Yeah, so one of the things that Gareth did that I thought was really just wonderful, he bought a bunch of film posters for the films that inspired him on this project. And he said he does this for most of his films. So, the whole editing room was plastered with, we'd have Apocalypse Now and Akira and Baraka and all of these wonderful films that were an inspiration to him and influence specifically on this project. And it was inspiring every day to come into the office and, you're looking at a Apocalypse Now poster and you're looking at Akira or Baraka, and every day it's just there. It just kind of gets into you and you think about it.
Was he explicit with you about how he wanted the creator to be different? Did he ever say, where I want to go with this that other films haven't gone before is this place?
I think a big part of what makes his take on AI so interesting in this film in particular is how he treats the AI as natural beings, about exploring sentience. So much of this project's about exploring sentience and what it means to be alive. One of the things he did with the actors, he would ask them to perform as if they were human. The AI perceive themselves as being human. And there's so many odd things about these AI that you don't really see usually, where they're eating, they're sleeping, they're laughing and joking. They're doing all these things that are just so human. And I know in a lot of the more docu-style, where he'd be shooting extras and all these people, he would shoot them and, they weren't aware whether it'd be human or AI. And it created all these natural performances, and you have these very odd kind of human things that are unpredictable. And then afterwards, the visual effects come in, it makes them AI. And then it has this quality where over the course of the film, your brain just starts accepting it as just nature. They become more a part of the natural world, because that's one of the things that the film's grappling with, is this idea of nature and machine being a part of nature. So that was something that we talked about and something that we explored.
Obviously, Gareth is the director, but he's also co-writer. Do you find that it makes the process a little more expedient and that he can make those hard choices faster? Or is it the opposite, where it's like, no, I wrote this, I don't want to lose this piece?
I've been very fortunate to work with a few writer-directors kind of back to back on projects. So it's something that I think I've been a little spoiled with. I absolutely love working with writer-directors. One of the things I love about it is how open they are to working the material. Since it is their world, their imagination, we can just, in the editing room, kind of just continually work the material and reinvent and re-explore, and nothing is sacred. And it just allows a very freeing environment. So you can make those kind of broad changes instantly. And Gareth's imagination is just constantly flowing. And it just allows a lot of freedom in the editing. And, this film, we really went there. A lot of the editing choices we took, in large part to condense it. It was a massive assembly, and it was a massive script. It was an epic film. There was so much in it, and Gareth had so much to say, and so many wonderful set pieces and characters to explore. And ultimately, we just couldn't keep the pace going without making some trims. So in order to make those trims, we got very creative in the way that we told the story in the editing room. And without Gareth's, very quick response to rewriting and kind of changing things, I don't know if we would have been able to do that, at least not as quickly.
So we talked about the handoff aspect of it, what Joe and his team did to prepare things best for you. On your side, you read the script, you talk to Hank, you're all in to do it. What do you do next to prep for it?
I love prep. I love preparing for a film.
You might be the only one.
It's one of my favorite parts, actually, because there's so much excitement. The earlier I get involved, the more fun it is for me. I love kind of exploring my own imagination and getting familiar with the script and thinking about the world. Depending on the project, they each have different explorations to go in. As far as, I've done period pieces, so you're reading about the history of that time period, or you're learning about, if it's based on a book, you're reading the book and you're getting excited about the author's take on it and all the research there. I just did a film in New York in the 80s, and, I was looking at street photography from the time just to kind of immerse myself. For me, the editing process, the filmmaking process, it's about full immersion for me, and I absolutely love doing that. So for this project, to prepare for it, first of all, I hadn't worked with Gareth. So the first thing I did was I kind of scoured the internet for interviews with him, both in print and on, YouTube is a great resource. And I learned a lot about his editing style and his filmmaking style, because when I work with filmmakers, one of the things I want to do is get into their mindset. It's such a joy as an editor for me to work with different filmmakers. And I love going back to filmmakers I have a good connection with, but it's also exciting to work with different voices, come from different backgrounds, and there's different things that they love about cinema. There's different filmmakers that have influenced their work and excited them. So, with Gareth, it was diving into some of the things that inspired him to be a filmmaker. And, there's a lot of, crossover for me. We have a lot of this, projects and filmmakers that really, inspired both of us to be a part of this. So after I saw those interviews, one of my favorite things I found on YouTube, which, is a fun watch if someone wants to find it. There's a, behind the scenes on the editing of Monsters that he did. And him and his editor, Colin, go into kind of their process, and it's unique. It's that film, they shot a lot of material, and Garrett's whole thing, he does this kind of ad-libbing, improv, jazz-like flow to his entire process, with the writing, with the shooting, with the editing, with the visual effects. He's always in this kind of improv. He creates a lot of space for spontaneity and invention on the fly, because, his imagination is so strong. He has great collaborators who can flow with that style. So, that happens in the editing room. That was all exemplified in that video. And then when I started the project, I was just diving into all these films, that we had mentioned, many of them being favorites of mine, but I was revisiting them with a new lens, having read the script and thinking about how it might influence the work we've done. And one of the things I like to do is I also look at a lot of the films in the genre that I think might be influential, that Gareth hasn't mentioned, that could spur some idea, not to copy or emulate, but just to live inside your mind. And again, it's more the deep dive for the process for the project I'm working on. So in this case, it was looking at Baraka and Tree of Life, Akira, the original Star Wars films. And then, I also looked at things like Chappie and, Ghost in the Shell, lots of projects, just to have them live in my head.
I like to ask editors if they edited on site, or whether or not they did, if they have a preference. Clearly, in this case, you weren't out there in Nepal or anywhere else where Gareth was. If you had a preference, would you prefer to edit on site, or do you like to be removed from that so that you can have more of a hard line between the decisions you're making and what actually went on in production?
Yeah, so on this project, I wasn't able to be there during production, but with my style being so immersive, yes, I much prefer to be on site, on location. I like to travel for work. And I'm not a huge fan of maybe being on the set while they're shooting, but I want to be close to the set. I want to be in the environment that we're shooting in, because, I'll go for walks. I'll explore the neighborhoods, and the sounds, the smells, the environment, it all kind of goes into your subconscious. I did this film Armageddon Time, and we cut in New York, and just walking around the streets of New York, the sounds that you hear and the feelings that you experience, that goes into the editing. So in this case, I would have absolutely loved to go to Thailand if that was in the cards for this project, because you experience all of that full immersion, and just everything gets absorbed and everything becomes a part of the work, and you're just more aware of kind of the world that your characters are inhabiting.
No matter where you do edit, you're going to be there for a while, and you're going to be working very hard to create the best version of the film as possible. You talked a little bit about this, but if you wouldn't mind digging in a little more, what you do to establish a comfortable working environment that you can be productive in for months at a time.
The work environment, the most important thing is the crew. It's the people you spend your time with. Doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter what you're doing. It's always about the people. On this project, we had one of the best crews I've ever experienced. Just wonderful, wonderful people. I mean, I mentioned Joe's team, but on our side, Hank and I had been working with Sarah Russell, our first, for a little while now, and she's just remarkable. She's the person you want with you on every project. She's a beacon of happiness and joy and fun and humor. And that's the thing, Hank and I and Sarah, there's so much humor and so much fun in the way that we like to work, cracking jokes all day and just keeping it really light. The rest of our team, is Michael Schusterman, Zachary Harrison, Jordan Brown, and we just created this little family. I mean, we spend so many hours together, oftentimes working 6-7 days a week when there's a tight schedule. So there's a lot of bonding. And in our case, we had done other projects together, so we had already gotten really close. So to be able to go into the trenches together, again, it's just this sense of humor and just laughing at all of the silliness and keeping it light. That's huge. And, also having windows if you can with daylight. If you can open them, even better, get some fresh air. I like to go for walks. And it's all about cultivating that space where it's very inclusive and, all the assistants are a part of the creative process. That's really important. I think that everyone feels like the film can be something they're proud of, that's something they put their heart and soul into. And, for an assistant, it's not just a job, they're a part of the process as much as we are, and they're in the room and they're writing and they're creating ideas and editing things. And it's just this group mentality of we're going to do this thing together, support each other, and really care for each other.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the people aspect. When I talk to editors who are co-editing, we talk about the division of labor, and the answers are varied. It can be, well, they do that episode, I do this episode, or in film, it's we trade reels or scenes, or maybe I have an expertise in a certain style of scene where the other editor focuses on montage. For the creator, how did you and Hank balance taking the work that Joe had done to the finish line?
Hank and I had worked together before on a few projects, and we had gotten very used to how each other's brains work. And that's a huge part of my process with any collaborator, is that I really want to understand who they are, how they see the world, how they see their process. So that is, oftentimes that's how I work with directors. I try and understand their process. Like I mentioned with the interviews I looked up on Gareth, I just want to try and understand how their mind works. And with Hank, we had spent a lot of time together. So I felt like we had already kind of established how we think a little bit. So we understand, how to work with each other. And that applies to the editing. It also applies to just, personality and just how we work together. I mentioned all the humor is really important. But when it comes to splitting the work, in this case, we had a lot of ground to cover. It's a 5-hour assembly. It's a huge epic film. And of course, there's deadlines, especially when you have a lot of VFX. You have to meet deadlines to get the visual effects out to the vendors so they can start their process, which takes a lot of time. So one of the things we did right away is we kind of just split the film in half in the beginning and just worked on sequences. And that was the beginning of the process. And then once Gareth got more involved with us into the director's cut, we were kind of headed towards working together more. So at first we were kind of off on our own for a little bit, just working on sequences. And then we would show each other sequences. And then over time, it just became more and more focused on being together. We had these projects, for example, where each of us would kind of take a project. And then on this film, there was a lot of creative brainstorming. So we would kind of sit in the room as a group, the three of us, and talk about a sequence or talk about the whole film or, where we need to go, the character. So we'd have these kind of nice conversations about the story and about how we wanted to take certain sequences. And we would, sometimes go off on projects and take a day or so to work on this scene or that scene. And then we come back together. And then eventually, on the back half of the project, we were just in the room together constantly. That was the process. So it was just the three of us in the room together, brainstorming ideas, having the assistants come in. That sometimes they would be a part of it. Sarah was in the room collaborating with us as well. I like to equate it to like a band jamming in the studio, where each of us has an instrument. Some of us will riff here and the other person riffs off that. And then it becomes something new and fresh that's kind of not one mind, but 3 or 4 minds.
The most important part of a film is generally that first reel or the open of the film, laying the groundwork, setting the context, and teaching the audience how to watch the movie. You do this in a very interesting manner. For a film that's set, I think, about 40 years into the future, you use this antiquated sort of newsreel footage of the robots working and fighting alongside humans. I'd like to know about how you collectively tackled that from Joe to you and Hank, and what you and Hank did to ultimately bring it to where it was.
Yeah, the opening sequence is something that just kept evolving. It started with how do we get the audience to understand this world? There's so much world building that has to be done so quickly in order for you to enjoy the movie and understand what's happening. And we wanted to have a lot of fun with it. So it started off small and then it kept kind of growing as we kept working on it. It was later in the process that the audio came in, the dialogue of kind of these 50s adverts. And that was something that Zachary Harrison, one of the assistants, was really a big part of, actually. He kind of was really passionate about this sequence, and he worked with Gareth on some of those lines. And it was just really great to see his work. I mean, he's a really talented editor, and he really put a lot of work into the sequence and made it something special. And we had a lot of fun integrating the adverts. We would have like a simulant commercial, and, Gareth is kind of looking at fonts from the 50s to make it more authentic. One of the things that's really wonderful about that sequence is that it sets up the alternate history. It's in the production design. It's been there from day one. Gareth had talked about it. You're going to see things from the past and you're going to see things from the future. And we're going to try not to see anything from our present. So you'll have cars, if you noticed, from the 70s, from the 80s, the 90s in the film. And then you'll have cars from the 2050s, the 2060s in the film. But you won't have modern day things. So that was a big part of setting up that language. It's a world where there's no cell phones, there's no social media, and they're using tube televisions at times. So it's about setting up our world that it's a very different world. Technology started with, the robots started being built in the 50s, and then all of our technology skewed differently, which is why some of the technology in the film, it's just really different. It's schismed from our timeline into something new, which then sets up kind of this exciting fantasy world. And you don't know what's going to happen next. And you don't know how things work in this world. So it's a discovery as you go. So there's that sequence. And then there's the general speech coming right after that, which was kind of an exciting thing to have there too. It's kind of part one, part two of this little opening sequence where you feel the devastation through the mind of the people who were hurt by that explosion in Los Angeles, which our character Joshua is dealing with. So it brings us in from a very character-centric point of view. So you understand his emotions, even if it's not linked directly to him right away. But as you start watching that first reel, you're processing it emotionally through his mindset of there was this great excitement around this technology, and then something bad happened, and then there's a lot of trauma the world is grappling with. And that's kind of where the story starts.
You mentioned Joshua and the impact that he's feeling. A big part of the story is his struggling to get over the loss of Maya, his love and the mother of his unborn child. Throughout the film, you go to flashbacks of Maya and his time with her when things were good. You already talked about the benefit of working with Gareth being the writer. That feels like something that wouldn't necessarily be so specifically scripted. And just knowing when to go to those flashbacks is almost sort of a punctuation. How did you work through those with Gareth? Were they specifically scripted, or was it the kind of thing where you felt like we can keep going back to this flashback at certain points to give the audience a break?
There were flashbacks in the original concept for the film. Gareth shot them. They were pretty long sequences, and there were several points where they kind of naturally happened in the screenplay. And then in the editing process, as we were tightening it, we first took them out, and then we were looking at where they might naturally come into play. And we looked at them, or at least I looked at them, I can only speak for myself, coming from Joshua's point of view, and how on his journey in the film, he's dealing with memory, and he's ruminating on the past and his relationship with Maya and his relationship with everything going on in New Asia and his time there. So it's a great way to get into his inner monologue, even if it was visual, flashing back as he's discovering something new, or there's something triggering his memory in the present. We're going back in and he's seeing it with new context. it's a fun thing, if you see the film twice, you can look at the man that he was and the man he grows to become throughout the process of the film. In a film where there's a lot going on, it's nice to have these breaths where you can dive into his soul and what's going on in the character's mind in kind of a succinct way.
Being a science fiction movie, there's going to be a lot of big set pieces, a lot of great action sequences, and we could talk about any one of those. But it's the quieter, more personal, more powerful thematic things that make those sequences work, which is generally the case in a lot of movies. So I wanted to focus on one of those in particular. And we already discussed Joshua's missing Maya and feeling that he has lost her. He is reunited with her in a very powerful scene. I won't give anything away, and I'll ask you to talk about how that very personal scene came together and might have evolved as well, because a scene like that, you absolutely have to make it work. Otherwise, the film sort of falls apart.
Yeah, so there's this sequence. It's coming off a big action sequence, and there's a lot of recent discovery information that Joshua's character is dealing with, big revelations. And we're kind of anticipating a really powerful moment. And in this area of the film, they're in Nepal. And it was about setting up this big scene that was coming and coming off of this big scene we just had. So it's a moment for the audience and the character to reflect on what's happened and what potentially will happen. And Gareth had described this sequence as something he wanted to try doing that was a bit of a soul-searching sequence. He had shot this beautiful footage in the mountains with John David, and the performance is just incredible. And he shot all this docu footage of the people who live in that area on the mountain. And it was something that just immediately was very emotional. A lot of that driven by John David's performance and really inspired the edit. Another thing that was really cool is Gareth had done a recording session with John David about the character's more internal thoughts. And we had this kind of track to work with. So using that, it was nice to work with the sound and the visuals and doing something that's a bit poetic, going into the character's soul as he is grappling with a lot of deep emotions.
That's interesting about that audio track that Gareth did with John David. Was it like an interview between the two of them, or just a dialogue between the two of them?
Yes, in character. John David was in Joshua's character, and Gareth would kind of just ask these questions, and John David was so emotional, and it was just very useful just to understand what the character was dealing with and some of his backstory. And yeah, a lot of it was just for that, just for reference. I mean, some of it ended up in the film, but a lot of it was just very useful just for the editing process.
Earlier, you were talking about the people, and what's so important about being on a project like this is the people around you. I should ask you about your assistant crew. In fact, I will. Tell me about your crew and what it is you look for in a good assistant.
I love having a crew that we're just there to support each other and have fun and really have a good experience making a film. We spend so many hours, months, sometimes a year plus working on a project, and it's all about that experience. That's the thing I think about most when I start a project, actually. It's, all the creative stuff is, it's everything for me. I'm so passionate about filmmaking and editing and working on the material and working with directors. But the thing that kind of matters most is, in life, right, is the people you spend it with. So that being the entire team. This project, I was returning to work with Sarah Russell. We had worked together for many, many months on some other projects, and we have a good relationship. And she's just so brilliant and just such an inspiration. And Michael Schusterman, I think he was our apprentice editor on Don't Look Up. And it was his first project out of college. He was just getting into the industry, and it was just amazing to see how quickly he grew and learned, and he became a second assistant on this film. He's also very creative. I mean, that's the thing. Everyone is just so creative. I met Zachary Harrison on this project, another assistant, and he's become a friend, and he's also incredibly creative, great editor. And all three of them are just very passionate about filmmaking, and they all have incredible senses of humor. That's so important, is the humor, I think. If you're going to spend hours with people, you got to have fun. You got to laugh. So we spend most of our days laughing, actually. He's cracking jokes. I also met Glenn Coate, visual effects editor on this film, and he's just incredible to work with. Really good guy and really smart and really cares, really passionate. And Jordan Brown, who is our production assistant, this is his first project that he's ever worked on. And we got close. He's another really creative person. He does music and he writes. And so as far as having assistants and having a crew, I think the humor obviously is number one. Good-natured, kind, compassionate people. On the technical side, of course, for assistants, you want to have people who are technically competent, and the other way around computers and around Avid, and that all comes kind of second nature to them. But more importantly, they're passionate about the work and they love it. We do work long hours in this field, and it's great to work with people who love doing that, working on the project. And, we start the day with our morning coffee and kind of checking in on one another and maybe talking about ideas that we had or just whatever, kind of a regular office banter. But it's so important to have that and to start the day with that, because it's a reminder that we're a group of people kind of working together on this larger thing. But we're a group of people, and it's really nice to care about the people you work with.
Did you have screenings for The Creator? And if you did, what did you learn from them?
Yeah, we had some friends and family screenings, and it was very useful to have those screenings. But it was also a bit odd for this project because there are so many visual effects in the film. There's so many characters that are AI, and there's different forms of AI. So in the early days where we didn't have much artwork or information to share with our audience, it was challenging at first for them to understand the film without having that information. We put text on screen and things like that and tried to explain it. It did help us focus more on the character work and the story and the emotion because we didn't have the effects at that time. So we really got to focus on that. And then, friends and family helped us understand bits of information that they needed, which, again, it was a lot of guesswork because we knew that the VFX would fill in a lot of that. And then, of course, as the effects came in, we started pulling out certain exposition that was unnecessary because, the picture tells 1,000 words. And, the imagery from the visual effects team told the audience what they needed, which we knew would happen. But they really helped us with rhythm and pace as well, just understanding kind of the flow. One of the best things that comes out of a screening is just you sit in the room and you get to feel the audience. You hear when they laugh. You hear when they are maybe fidgeting or bored. You can feel it. You can just feel it.
So one of the things that I'm going to take away from this talk with you is just how much learning you do going into a project. So it would seem to make sense that the last question I ask you would be what you learned from working on this project. What do you take away with you from doing The Creator?
I'd worked with visual effects before on previous projects, but working with Gareth was a real education. He comes from a visual effects background, and he's done incredible visual effects films before, and he has such a great relationship with the visual effects vendors. Just learning about how he approaches visual effects from a creative standpoint, it really opened up my eyes to the possibilities of what you can do with visual effects. And, it really is about imagination. It was just such a treat to watch him imagine these worlds and imagine these things on screen. It rubs off, and I was just really grateful to spend time working with him and kind of observing his process.
I'm sure. Well, I just realized after all this talk about The Creator and about AI, I never asked what you think about AI.
I think when we talk about AI, there's two things to keep in mind. There's the popularized version of AI that we talk about, like ChatGPT and things like that. I don't think that they're sentient. So they're incredibly complex, data-driven tools that humanity can work with. And that's one conversation. And then there's the conversation about sentience and this idea that our film explores, where we're really talking about AI as another being inhabiting this planet with us that is intelligent, as intelligent, if not more intelligent, which, as far as I know, isn't something that we're grappling with right now, but could be our future,
Well, as for me, I just go day to day. I don't like to think about the future. What I do know is that no amount of AI could make a film like you did or make any film. It takes real people with real imaginations. I just want to congratulate you.
Thank you.
On a very cool film, and thank you for talking with us about it today, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Now, the real question is, when will AI take over podcasting? Probably not soon enough for anyone that's been listening to mine for any length of time. For now, let's just let the mistakes and quality issues you have to endure be my proof of humanity. A big thank you to Scott for talking with us today about The Creator. As I said, it's always exciting to have new voices on the show and to see new careers take off. Good luck to Scott on all his future projects, and hopefully he comes back this way again someday to talk to us about them. If you want your career to take off, well, that's going to take a lot of hard work. You know that. But something that could definitely help is being up on the latest and greatest editing tools within Avid Media Composer, like the new AI-based script sync and phrase find. Yes, you can see how AI can actually empower humans, with limited likelihood of annihilating Los Angeles. As always, I encourage you to check it out for yourself by clicking that little link in the show notes. That is your express train to the Media Composer page on avid.com. Well, that will do it for today. I hope you had fun going back to the movies with me. We'll hit the couch again next week for a little TV. Some really good stuff. Until then, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.